Okay, here we go. Well, good morning. I'm pleased to have joining me today Joel Nelson. He is the Director of Starting for Converge North Central. Joel, thank you for taking some time with me here.
Glad to do it for you, Bart.
Known Joel for quite a while. He's a great guy. I have known him by many titles. He is currently the Director of Starting. So Joel, why don't you just explain to us what in the world a Director of Starting is?
Yeah, well, obviously I opted to go with the better job title as opposed to a pay increase, just so I could have that good title. But Converge North Central, there's a lot of things we do, a lot of things we hang our hats on. Strengthening churches, camping, sending people into missions, and one of them is also starting, and that's starting new churches. And it's just an important value to us to always be in the game of multiplication. We want to multiply pastors, we want to multiply leaders, we want to multiply small groups, we want to multiply disciples, but we also want to multiply churches because we think that's a really effective way to reach the kingdom. So I do a lot of other things around here at the office, but at the end of the day, the big hat that I wear is involved in seeing new congregations begun across Minnesota and Iowa, all of our district, Converge North Central.
So we're talking about church planting, and this is a Sunday that all across Converge, across the country, we're focusing and highlighting the work that we're doing with church planting. So why don't you answer this question? Why should a little church out in the middle of nowhere like River's Edge care about church planting?
Yeah, well, I think every church should care about it because for a variety of reasons, and I'll just in no particular order. I think there's a part of the church that is we talk about church being an organism. The church is a living body, and living things multiply. That's something that is built in and innate to that. So I think this is part of the nature of the church. We have another reason is we have the example of in the Bible. Paul, the Apostle Paul, he was a church planner. He was the first church planner. He went to little places, little out of the way places, and he met people there. And when he left a new church there. He went to big places too, big cities, and also planted there as well. So we have the model in scriptures about starting new congregations is something that we see, and let's continue in that. Another reason I always remind churches that every church has a birthday. Every church was started at some point. They're started for different reasons. We have a thing in our circles we call unplanned pregnancy. That's a church split. That's how sometimes churches start, by splits. They're unplanned pregnancies. But there's also a need in a community. The call, a person or a group of people has a call to start something new, something fresh. In that way, so every church at some point was a church plant. Every church at some point didn't exist this Sunday, but the next Sunday that they did. So it's hard to be against church planting if you realize that, well, our church was planted at one point. At one point in history, somebody had faith, somebody had vision, somebody took some resources and saved resources, somebody followed the call of God and began a church that wasn't there before. Other reasons I think everyone should be involved or everyone should be concerned about church planting is the need. There's a lot of statistics out there that you can look at, but basically, if you look at evangelical churches, I just want to keep it kind of to that window. But gospel preaching, faith-filled, evangelistic, evangelical churches, we're losing ground. When you take in consideration the birth rate in our country, you take in consideration that, and you compare that with the number of churches that are dying, because churches die. The 7 churches in the book of Revelation, they're no longer around anymore, those individual local churches. When you think about churches that are closing, and you look at that against growth rates, and you look at that in light of how many churches are we starting, we're losing ground. I read a statistic somewhere that there's approximately right now 1 church for every 1,000 people in the country. If we want to just maintain that status quo, when you take in consideration birth rate, when you take in consideration churches that are closing, we need to start 1,900 churches a year for the next 30 years just to maintain that 1 church for every 1,000 people. So missions, I'm a big missions fan. My best friend, missionary in Africa. My brother, also missionary in Africa. But in a sense, it's a mission field right here in every city, every town along that line. So I think all churches should care about that, because the other thing, last two things for this question is there's an effectiveness in church planting that doesn't happen elsewhere. There's some sociological, theological type thing that experience has proven out that the starting of new churches is the most effective way to reach people for Christ. And this, I could go really deep on that one and give you all sorts of stuff along that line. But people who study such things, and there are people who study such things, that in terms of evangelism, of expanding the kingdom of God through salvations, church plants are more effective. Doesn't mean other churches can't do that. But just church planting is more effective in that. And the last thing for this question, Bart, I liken it to the story of Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed was a real guy, traveled through Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, a long time ago. And basically, he was an evangelist for apples. He wanted everybody to like apples and to appreciate apples and to enjoy apples and all that kind of stuff. So he traveled the country, that part of the country, promoting apples as an evangelist of apples. But he didn't give out apples. He gave apple seeds to plant more trees so more people could enjoy apples. The fruit of the apple tree is not the apple. The apple is the package. What's really important is what's inside that package, and that's seeds that plant more apple trees. So church planting is basically planting more apple trees, not just giving away apples, but it's planting trees in addition to that. So there's a quick 10,000 foot view as why I think every church should have an interest in church multiplication.
Yeah, and you touched on my next question. The thing I most often hear, especially, out here in the country, we've heard that at River's Edge, aren't there already enough churches here? Do we really need one more? Yeah. It's not just the number of churches, it's who those churches are. And when we identify the idea of an evangelical church being important, and those churches dying, there aren't enough churches in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and obviously every city, every community, every area is unique in its own way. But at the end of the day, are there people in your town, whether it's 500 or 5 million, are there people in your town that don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ? And I'm assuming the answer is yes, in most places, in probably all places. So how can we go reach those people? Well, your existing church isn't going to be able to reach them all, because every church has their own little niche, the way they do things, and God honors that. It's a very blessing. But the church I go to, that I like, is different from the church my parents went to. It's different from the church my kids go to, and they're all faith-filled, gospel preaching evangelical churches, but people are just kind of different. So yeah, as long as there are people who aren't hooked up with the church, how can we reach them? I think the local churches already existing, they should be strategic, and they should be faithful in how they can reach them. And I think one of the tools to do that is not assuming everybody is going to want to come to my church, but how can maybe another kind of church with maybe a different music style or a different emphasis, preaching the same gospel, maybe that would reach them along that way. So, and with that question, Bart, I think, maybe your town, okay, but we don't need another church in our town. Maybe it is small and there's good things going on there. Well, maybe there's a town next door. Here's a town down the road. Maybe it's just, for a 50-mile radius, we just don't see an opportunity for us to get involved in, but we want to be involved in somehow starting churches. So that's where we kind of come in to help connect churches to new church planters, because church planters are like missionaries in some way. There's support that's needed, both prayer support, relational support, encouragement, financial support, different resources. So one of my prayers for this church planting weekend that's happening across all the churches of Converge, nationally, is wherever a church has their needle on church planting, from we don't know anything about it to we're already involved in it, wherever they're at on that continuum, I just hope and I'm praying that they'll move the needle. They'll move the needle a little bit from we don't do anything to we do a little bit, or we do a little bit to we'll do more, or we do some and we'll do a lot more now. So I think the prayer I have is wherever you at, your church is at in terms of starting new congregations, figure out where your needle is and how can you move it in faith and see what God does with that.
I'm excited about bringing this conversation to River's Edge because, one of the things we've talked about a great deal and is a real focus for us is evangelism. And another passion of this church since the church launched was missions.
Yeah.
I think those two things sort of meet in the middle at church planting.
Yeah, that's one of the, when we do church planting, when we look for a church planter, we have 16 building blocks. And the 16 building blocks we think are important for a successful church planter. The first 5 are basic to any kind of pastoral role in that way. The next 11 are a little more targeted into church planting. And one of those is what you just mentioned, is evangelism. When we plant a church, our goal isn't to steal the sheep from another flock. Realizing that sometimes sheep go to where the grass is greener, and that happens. But our goal is we don't want to, shuffle believers around from church to church. We want to go out there and we want to expand the kingdom by finding the sheep out there that the Bible tells us they're outside the flock, and when they hear the Savior's voice, they will respond. So the heart of church planting is evangelism, and we want our church planters not just to have a cognitive mental understanding of evangelism. What's your thoughts on evangelism? Well, I'm a big fan of it. We want to go past the intellectual assent of evangelism with our church planters and have them exhibit behavioral aspects of evangelism. Okay, so you're a big fan of evangelism. Who have you led to the Lord in the past 5 years? Give me some names of the people you're kind of talking to right now about Christ on a regular basis. That's how much we value evangelism. We want to make sure our church planters that they're honed in, they're focused on that, because that's how we want them to build the church, not by having a better kids program or better music from the church down the road, just everybody come down there. That's not a successful church plant.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Joel, for your time. I think we've painted a little bit of a picture of what church planting looks like. It's not just somebody wanting to go out and start something. It's intentional. It's focused. And I think I've seen real power come through CNC's focus over the years of that. So thank you so much for painting that picture for River's Edge.
Thanks, Bart, and thank you, everybody. And we're here to help. We're here to serve.
God bless you. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
All right.